This is a demonstration in fruit tree grafting. So, not a workshop. A workshop takes about 4 hours, a lot more materials, but it's a very easy grafting technique, and I've got lots of extra Scion. So, at the end of this demonstration, I'm sure you'd be capable of doing this graft. So, if you want to take any Scion wood with you, you are welcome to. So, let me just get a few more things set up. My workshops are paperless now. I don't hand any notes out, but I've got a website that's on here. If you want to pass those around, climateknot.com. There's pages and pages of downloadable information on food forestry there. All the notes from today's presentation are there, as well as lots of good, useful handouts. This is the handout that I typically give. I just find sometimes I find these things all over the place. So you can download it from the website. I'll be referring to it today. Because there are a few resources you'll want for grafting. So, great. Just to start from the beginning, my name's Mark DuPont. I live at a place called Sandy Bar Ranch and work with, we started Klamath Knot Permaculture. We've been teaching permaculture workshops up there for about 23 years. So Sandy Bar Ranch, Klamath Knot Permaculture are the main thing. I also work with the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, and as a matter of fact, we're in the midst of a project now with working with the Karoo tribe and the Salmon River Restoration Council. We just grafted 200 fruit trees, saving 33 different heirloom varieties from the Klamath and Salmon River corridors up there. So it was a really fun workshop we're in the midst of. So I'm going to talk about grafting today. I'm going to talk about a specific grafting technique that you can do right now if you have dormant Scion wood. I'm going to explain what Scion wood is. I happen to have a bunch of dormant Scion wood, so you're welcome to grab some of this dormant Scion wood if you want to try this graft. A little bit of, before we get into the technique of grafting, a few words about what grafting is and why grafting is. So what grafting is that if you take two plants that are close enough related, in other words, with apples, it's another apple. If you take two of these different apple plants and you intentionally wound them and cut them and expose the cambium layer, which is the vascular tissue underneath the bark, and you place them in close contact and you wrap them up, then what happens is they both form something called callus wood. And then they heal that wound and they grow together. And that's what grafting is. You're making two cuts on two different plants and you're sticking them together to make one plant. In a nutshell, that's it. And it all has to do with the cambium layer, which on a little twig like this, if you scrape it, you'll eventually get to a green layer, and that's the cambium that's taking nutrients from the soil and shuttling it up to the leaves, nutrients and water, and it's taking photosynthates and sugars from the leaves and shuttling them down to the roots. So that's where all the magic's happening in the plant, and that layer is what you manipulate in grafting. There are dozens and dozens of different kinds of grafting techniques. So we're going to focus on one technique today called the bark graft. So why do you graft? You have to graft temperate zone fruit trees because they're unique individuals just like us. There's only one of them. You can't, if you combine them and breed them, if you collect the seed from them and plant it, they don't come true to seed like us, right? You can come up with a whole new unique being. So the only way to preserve fruit tree varieties is to clone them. It's not a genetic engineering technique. It's been happening for thousands and thousands of years. The easiest way to clone a plant is to take a cutting out of it and stick it in the ground. And if you're lucky, it'll root. Most temperate zone fruit trees will not do that. Many of them will. Mulberries will, figs will, pomegranates. But the ones that I'll be working with today, apples, pears, peaches, plums, nectarines, the most familiar deciduous fruits will not root from a cutting. So therefore what you do is you collect wood from the tree that you want, that has the fruit that you want. And that wood is called the Scion, and that's the top of your tree. And then you take another plant, which is rootstock. And that plant has been selected for the characteristics in the ground. The type of rooting it does, the soil it might be adapted to, and most importantly, the overall size of the tree. So grafting, so a tree's height is really determined by its rootstock. On some, so most fruit trees and nut trees are grafted, and that's the only way to get the true variety that you want. In some of them, you're going to actually see the graft line where they've been grafted. This is a persimmon. And in walnuts, you'll notice this difference. You can see very clearly what's called the graft union. So remember, everything from here down is the rootstock. Everything from here up is the Scion. So to collect Scion that's usable, you really want the nice sleek growth that grew the year before. You only want 1 year growth. You want to start from the tip of the tree and work your way back until you see this little circular growth ring. And then past that, it'll very obviously get into 2-year-old wood. The 1-year-old wood is supple and readily forms the callus wood that's going to heal the graft union. So choose your Scion wood appropriately, get 1 year growth, and that's going to be the best and longest and vigorous, like this one is, on wood that's been on a tree that's been pruned. So pruning produces better Scion. The bark graft is something that you do on mature trees. I can talk about, if we have time, how to graft young rootstock, and that's useful because the Humboldt Permaculture Field happens to have a lot of rootstock for sale this year. It's not easy to find rootstock. You have to order it specifically from a nursery. They've got a bunch out there for sale. If we have time, I'll talk about grafting onto rootstock. That's called a bench graft, where you actually pick up the rootstock, a small young rootstock, and you whip graft it. You work at a bench. You have the rootstock is not potted in that case. This type of technique is really cool and really fun because you can take an existing fruit tree, one that either is not bearing really well or it's got fruit that you don't like, or just like Jared said to me earlier, he's got an apple tree, a lone apple tree in his yard, and there's no other apple tree to pollinate it. Doesn't have enough room to plant another apple tree, doesn't want another apple tree. Well, you can graft other varieties onto that tree, to an existing tree. You can graft, if you want, several varieties onto that existing tree. I've got an apple tree at home that's got 17 different varieties on it, because I've only got limited space, and I've got a fruit tree problem. So I want lots of varieties, and all I can get in one area, so I just keep grafting onto that one. Now, what you will do, this is the perfect time to do this graft, because what you need is the rootstock in this case. I'm going to call the bottom tree the rootstock. Even though it's probably a grafted tree, we're just going to stick with that terminology. The base tree that you're grafting onto needs to have its bark slipping. You need to be able to cut into the bark and peel it open. And that only happens when the tree is actively growing. And so most fruit trees have, 1 or a few inches of growth on them right now, and that's a perfect time to do this graft, because what you're going to do is cut the whole top of the tree off. It's fairly dramatic. Most people gasp when they see me do this. I take the saw too. Cut all the branches off. It's a commitment. So where do you cut them off at? Well, I like to work at a good, comfortable working height, right? If you got a tree that's got a really nice framework and good scaffold branches that are well placed, perfect. Cut it all off at a height that takes advantage of those well-spaced branches. And what you're going to do is graft onto them, and they're going to shoot up like crazy. If it's a big mature tree and you graft it successfully this year and do as I show you, it's going to put on 6 to 8 feet of growth this year. It's going to just barrel out of there, and next year you're going to have a tree. It's going to replace that canopy, right? That's another cool part about this bark graft. So the bottom the bark needs to be slipped. if you're not sure if the bark is slipping, what you do is take your grafting knife. Remind me to come back to grafting knives and talk about them. I want to go through the graft first and then talk about the tools. So in case I forget, we got a short amount of time. You have to have a grafting knife for this. If I don't get back to that, remind me. You got to take your grafting knife, and what you're going to want to do is go to the tree somewhere over where you're going to graft, up above it, and make a little T incision in it. So just take your knife and slice down and slice across, and slip your knife down under there and try to pry the bark open. If the bark doesn't pry open, or if you pry it open and it splinters and splits and sticks to the bark, it's not ready. I can guarantee that most fruit trees here on the coast now are ready. But it's always better to check that out. And it should be kind of like a buttery sliding. You ought to be able to get your knife in there really well. In fact, you ideally want to have a grafting knife that has a little spatula, it's called. This is a cutting edge here, and on the back end of it is a little spatula. And that spatula is used to get underneath the bark and pry it open. Okay? So, if you've tested your tree and the bark is slipping, then what you do is first cut it all off at that height that you want. You have to cut all of the tree off. What happens if you have a tree with two branches, right? Two big branches, and you only cut one of them off and graft it? What's going to happen? Anybody? If I only graft one of the branch and I leave the other one high, what's wrong with that? Well, it's lopsided, but more importantly, what happens with fruit trees is that this taller branch is going to suck all the nutrients. Trees are apical dominant, and the highest branches naturally get most of the nutrients. That's how the tree grows tall. And if you leave this low, if you graft a branch and leave it low, but you leave this big tall branch on it, the tree is naturally going to want to put its energy up there. You need to force the energy into this graft that you're doing. So you need to commit and graft them and cut them all off. If, like Jared, you've got a fruit tree that you like, but you want to put extra varieties on it, you cut them all off anyway, and you take a branch or two, and you let that go. You don't graft that branch. And that stays the variety. That remains the variety of the parent tree that you want. And you graft the other ones. That make sense? Yeah. Let me know if any of this, if I'm going too fast. So once you've cut everything off, all you do is, once you've made your saw cuts, you want to go to your Scion and make sure make your Scion cuts. Okay. So now is a good time. I'm going to show you the cut, and then I'm going to come back to bark technique, to grafting technique. What you do is you take and hold your, notice how I'm holding the knife, and we'll come back to that knife technique. But you make a nice, long, smooth, straight cut. And then you make another cut on the back of that. So you got a little, like kind of a wedge here. Real small, real long, smooth cut. And then on the other side, a little shorter cut that's not very long. It's like a wedge. And then I take my tree and just slice down the bark vertically, put your knife, slip your knife into the bark and pry it open. And all you got to do with this is pry it open a little bit on the very top. This is a peach tree that I cut yesterday, so it's still actually, the bark is slipping. If I leave it for very long, it'll, since it's cut off, it won't slip anymore. And then once you get your bark started and just pried open a little bit, you slip your Scion down into the bark and just press it down. Okay? Then you've got this long stick. You don't want to leave all that. You want to count 2 to 3 buds. No more than 3 buds. And cut it off. Okay? Now, this is not a good demo because I left a few extra buds. I'm going to do a real quick another one so that when you guys come check it out, you'll be looking at the right example. Now, when you pry your bark open, you only pry one side. Don't pry both of them. You pry one side open and you set your Scion wood right down up against this long side. This is a very simple graft. It's very easy to do, very high success rate. As long as you just do the bark, you do the graft fairly quickly. I would wait until the sun goes down this time of year. Don't do it with the sun on it because you don't want this to dry out. And since you don't want it to dry out, you're going to need to seal it. So once you get all of your scions placed, and I would do probably 3, at least 3, maybe 4 in this, spaced around. You need to wrap it as soon as possible. And the best thing for that is just regular old black electrical tape. Okay, so take your black electric tape, start from the bottom or the top, it doesn't matter, and wrap around. I'm not going to do it all, but you want to wrap it thoroughly, all the way from the top down, or from the bottom up, it doesn't matter, but just make sure you pull it in nice and snug. Now there was one thing I neglected, a very important detail I neglected to mention. I don't know if you can see, and again, I encourage people to come up closer if you can't see well enough, because this is a demonstration. I left some exposed cut on the Scion, and that's called a church window. It's there on purpose. Do not bury the Scion. Leave some of that cut exposed. What will happen is that the rootstocks and the Scion start to form callus wood. And when those callus wood from the 2 separate pieces meet, they knit together. And then they reform the cambium, right? You want a slab, a little knob of callus wood to form right here intentionally. Because what that will do will be make this graft nice and strong. If you don't do that, if you bury it, then the graft will take. But the minute it starts getting branches on it and the wind starts blowing, it'll rip it off. Or if it even makes branches, which it'll do the first year, and a bird lands on it, a good-sized bird, say a raven or something, it'll break the branch. Whereas if you promote that callus formation, you get that little knob of callus, then it'll heal. So let's see, I'm going to put quickly, just run through that very quickly one more time for you. Again, you take your Scion, make a long cut, long straight cut, and then you make a short little back cut. Pry open your bark, slip it down in there. You don't have to even pry, you don't have to pry it open all the way down. All you got to do is get it started, and then it slides right down in there really nicely. Going to do it with another one here.
How do you decide how many your tree can, how many scions you can put?
How many scions per cut, or how many scions per tree?
Per tree.
Well, I would say, what I will say is first get the scions, guess on the scions per branch, and then find out how many branches you're going to cut. So a branch that size is going to take 3 to 4 scions. Who asked that question? It's 3 to 4 scions for something that size. A smaller half size, probably 2 would be sufficient. Okay? So here's before, and then here's after. This is a year later. Okay? So in 1 year, this right here, okay, right here is where the scions are. They're about that high. And then the scions that pushed grew about 6 feet. Okay, because there's a lot of energy in this tree, and you keep that energy focused in here.
So how long do you have to protect them from like wind before they're strong like that?
You don't have to worry about it. As long as you leave a little bit open and seal it, you don't have to do any protection from wind. Don't worry about it. If you set these properly and you leave the church window exposed, you leave a little bit of that showing, you're good. Now, a few more important things I didn't finish on is that you wrap with the tape, and then most critically, you coat with grafting seal. There is black asphalt emulsion seal available in most stores, or there's this vinyl-based Doc Farwell's grafting seal. I like this the best, but the black stuff works just fine as well. So you've got to get this in and then sealed fairly promptly. I mean, fairly promptly means you got 15 minutes to do that, which is, plenty of time. And do it in the evening when the sun is down, or in the morning before the sun is hitting it, and you're fine. You don't have to feel pressured with this. It's not like a race or anything. But just bear in mind that when you make your cuts, the wood does start to desiccate and dry out. So try to just get it done readily. The other thing is that you've cut this tree off everywhere, and the tree's not going to only grow in the grass. It's going to push suckers out in all directions. It's going to turn into a bush. Your job is to make sure all of the suckers, everything below the graft, which we'll call suckers, stays and remains lower than your grass. You can leave some of those branches if you want. They're called nurse branches. They'll grow out, photosynthesize, and feed the tree, which is in a little bit of shock from having been just topped, right? But don't let them overtake your graft. Because again, if they do overtake your graft, they're going to draw the nutrients and they're going to smother your graft out. So it's very important to keep them pruned back. And also what is a really good idea and is highly advisable is whitewash your bark. You've just removed the whole canopy from the tree. And for years, depending on how old the tree is, it's been used to that shade. You're exposing this bark now to the direct sun. And if you don't protect it, then it's liable to burn, especially something that's at this particular angle and really catching the harsh sun. And that burn will happen earlier than you think. It can happen in May and June. I mean, maybe not down, probably down here on the coast it even could. Happens like that time of year on that hot interior where I am. So whitewash it with water-based white paint that you just, a latex-based white paint that you just water down half and half. So just take a white water-based paint, water it down half and half, and that's your whitewash. Don't use full strength, because the full strength will kill the buds that are all dormant in the surface here that are going to sucker out. And you do want a few of those to form. So I will go ahead and pass these two around so people can have a look and take a look at the before and after. This graft, again, for those of you who came late, the graft is illustrated on the handout. I don't have handouts today. I've gone paperless. All of these handouts, if you go to klamathnot.com and they're on the home page, I knew I was teaching this grafting workshop. There on the home page is, there's a note that says notes from Mark's grafting class. I passed around some flyers that just have some of the permaculture events. I don't know if they made it around or not. There's two different flyers, but they both have actually that one's got the Klamath knot on it. Our other homepage is Sandy Bar Ranch, and it's the klamathnot.com that has the grafting handout. It's also got a really great, awesome slideshow. It's a slideshow. It's a series of slides that walks you through this.
So where do you apply the grafting compound?
Good question. Where do you apply the grafting compound? Thank you, because there was one little detail that I did forget. I'm going to get to where you apply the grafting compound in a second. There is one thing that I don't see mentioned in books that I like to do, which is I also like to cover that, church window with a little piece of tape. Okay? So the graft window is here. It's that little bit of cut you see that's revealed. I like to cover that with a piece of tape and just bring it down and attach it to the trunk and then cover over that. Yes, thank you. I'm going to do it just to emphasize. Actually, I won't, because then I'll pass it around and get all messy. You thoroughly goop everything and cover your tape completely. You cover the top. Another thing I like to do is I actually run the tape across the top too. That's not critical. Most instructions won't tell you to do that. I do it because I feel like it heals a little bit quicker if this grafting seal isn't on that piece to be healed. The piece that you see that's getting passed around, you can see how the rapid grafting is covering this wound up as they heal. And I find if that's covered with this grafting seal, that'll go slower. So I like to cover it with tape. Once it's all covered, cover every little bit of tape with this grafting seal. And as you pointed out, make sure you put a daub on the tip of every scion. That's very important as well. Then you got everything that's been cut, all your cut surfaces should be covered up. Okay? So that enables the healing to proceed and for it to not desiccate. Dry out. I'm going to show you a little bit about knife technique now. Any questions up until this point?
I have one.
Yeah.
So when would you remove the tape? Or what
I do it the year after.
Okay.
The nice thing about the black electric tape is it stretches really well. So you don't have to stress out about getting it off. And I leave it, and then the next year when I go back and prune, I cut it off. When you cut it off the next year, make sure you slice downward. Don't slice across when you cut tape off, because if you go too deep, you'll girdle the tree. So just slice downward to remove the tape. I'm going to pass this one around too, because it shows you what happens. This is a cherry, that other one is an apple. This shows you one that healed really nicely, and it shows you another side that did not heal well. So you can kind of just see the results of that. This happened because I used a wax-based grafting seal. I don't recommend them. It's an old-fashioned type of grafting seal, and it'll melt in the first hot days. And that's what happened with this one. So one of them did take, but the other one didn't. So I'll pass that around just so you get another chance to see.
You said this is vinyl based?
Well, this is a vinyl based, and the other one is a black kind of asphalt based. Either one of them work fine. They're also advertised as tree seal. Don't use them for putting on pruning cuts. You don't need to put any kind of seal on pruning cuts. Just make good pruning cuts. There's handouts on my website about that too. So don't seal trees. They really do not benefit from that. The sealing actually will inhibit them from healing themselves. So.
Can you pass that around also?
Yeah, sure, you bet. There you go. All right, so a little bit about technique, and we'll see if we got enough time or not to talk about the grafting rootstocks. We might. All right, this is important, and you won't find this in books for some reason. I don't know why. But most people cut like this. You've been taught to cut away from yourself, whittling and whatnot. The grafting stance and hold is completely different, and you're cutting like this. So a few key parts. One is you're cutting close into your body. You're not cutting towards your body, but you're cutting close into it. You have much better control. It's almost like you're working two opposing vices, right? Much, much better control. The other part of this is that a grafting knife, which is really critical, you have to have a grafting knife to do this. Don't try doing it with your pocket knife. It won't work. Because a grafting knife is a single beveled knife. If I hold this up to you and show you the blade, then this side here is completely flat. And then this side has a bevel cut on it. And that's important because if you place the flat side of the blade down onto your scion and start to cut, that bevel will lead you right through the cut in a really nice straight line. If you've got a double bevel, it's going to waver through there. It's going to wiggle. And you'll be very frustrated with the whole thing. So there is only a few specialized things you need, and one of them is a grafting knife. The ones that I like the best are the Victorinox ones, the Swiss Army knife brand. And again, on the handout, which I'll leave here for you, it actually tells you where you can get them. You can get them through Peaceful Valley Farm Supply and also through A.M. Leonard. They may even sell them in the local stores here. I haven't checked lately. But make sure you get a grafting knife. The Victorinox are the best trade-off between cost and quality. They've got good stainless steel blades on them, and they're only like $18, $20. You can spend $60, $70, $100 on a grafting knife, a good grafting knife. So that's on that link. If you go to the website, you don't even have to print this out. You can just click on the link, and it'll take you right to the item itself. So you got to take that. You want to take that grafting knife and hold it this way. And so before you start grafting, what I recommend you do is just cut a whole bunch of sticks and just stand there and practice. And fortunately, this is a super easy cut, so you'll get it pretty quickly. All you got to do is make a long sloping cut. Where most people go wrong is they'll twist. They'll put a little twist on that cut, or very commonly they will start and then can't get through it, and then they'll start again, then they'll go again, and you get one line and then another line, so you don't have a straight plane, right? Now, the reality with this kind of cut, this kind of graft, is it's very, very forgiving, so you don't have to get exact about it. The other graft that I'll demonstrate real quickly is more demanding, and so for that graft, you have to really have your technique down. So, if you want to try this, cut a few other sticks, stand there with your grafting knife, practice a little bit, right? Then go ahead and do your real thing. And that's what I do. When I learned grafting, I just stood there with a big pile of sticks and I just went, and I just cut, and look at it. You want it to be flat enough that you can place this on a piece of glass and it doesn't wiggle. It just sits right down flat. Your cut itself sits down flat on the glass really nicely. Okay, so I'll mention now too, before I get into the other and demonstrate the other type of graft, that I have labeled Scion wood here. So if anybody wants to try this and you'd like to grab some of this Scion, you're really welcome to. I am still in the midst of my grafting season, and I mentioned earlier we have a project going now with the Croup tribe up on the Klamath and Salmon Rivers, where we're combing all the old homestead orchards and finding all these old varieties, which are one-of-a-kind varieties. Some of them are up to 100 years old or more, and we've been identifying and collecting Scion from those, and we just grafted about 200 trees, 33 different varieties of apples, pears, peaches, plums, and so what we did first was we bench grafted them. Now next we're going to go through and top work. We're going to find these old orchards and find seedling root trees coming up, seedling rootstocks or seedling plants, and top work them using this technique I showed you. So the ones that I brought today are not varieties from that project, because we need that material. But there's some of my favorite apples, pears, and plums from that I've been growing. So if you want to try this, you're welcome to.
How long will these keep?
These will keep. Just take them now. You don't have to. If you have a plastic bag, stick them in a plastic bag, but don't worry about it. To get them from here to home, they're not going to dry out too badly. They'll be fine. When you get home, take a piece of paper, newspaper, scrap paper, whatever, and dampen it and wrap it around that and stick it in a plastic bag and put it in your fridge. And they'll last, boy, they last till June, probably. But you want to do your grafting wood sometime over the next couple of weeks. You want to do your graft itself.
Yeah.
So I'll leave these here, and I'll try to quit early enough that people can help themselves if they want. There's some masking tape here. So what you need to do is come up to this, look at the variety, pull out your wood and label it, okay? And I'll have pens and such, and we're gonna need to move that somewhere too. I don't want to disrupt the next. We've got time before the end of our demo. But I think what I would prefer to do is move this out to the hall at the end, and people can help themselves if you want to. So stick around afterwards if you're really interested and you can take some of this home. Now, since we got a little bit of time, is there any other questions about grafting? I should mention a little bit.
Bench graft?
What's that?
How do you do bench graft?
That's where I'm getting to. But I should mention before we go further, what can you graft on? Okay? So in general, the safest thing is to stick with the same variety. Graft an apple onto an apple, a pear onto a pear. Okay? That's the easiest thing. Now, if you want to get a little fancy and mix it up a little bit, which you can, apples do go on apples. That's about it. Although you can graft a rose onto an apple onto a rose, and you can take a quince and graft pears onto it. If you got a hawthorn, you can graft pears onto that, right?
Wow.
Here's the funnest one of all. If you got a plum, right, you can graft all the stone fruit onto that. So I had a tree before that had a peach, a plum, an apricot, an almond, and European and Asian plum all on the same tree. So you can do that. They're really bizarre looking trees, you know, good novelties, you know. So you can mix and match this up and play around with it. Again, like I say, if you've got the seedling volunteer trees are a good opportunity, you know, to play with this graft. For those that arrive later, what I mentioned earlier too is that you can change over an existing fruit tree that you have. And the beauty in that is if anybody has, you know, taken years to take care of a fruit tree and then after 6, 8, 10 years you find out it's not what you want, you've invested all that time, you've pruned it, it's there, right? Removing that tree is a pain in the ass. I mean, you gotta cut it back in its suckers and you gotta dig it up and it takes a lot of time. By top working it, you'll replace the canopy in a year if it's a full grown tree. It'll just boom, come back. So not only have you avoided all this work, but you've recreated a tree into what you want. And once you get this technique down, you know, if you've got some fruit trees in an orchard, just about any variety that you spot that you want can be yours. So it is the bar craft particularly I have a lot of fun with. I really like it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and demonstrate for you as well the bench graft. Again, yep.
I was just gonna ask, can you graft more than once? Like once you do one graft and you have a combination of two, can you like do more than that, or are you done with that?
Tell me what you mean by that.
Like, can you do, once it starts growing again, can you graft it like again?
Oh yeah, you can
further
graft
on?
onto it. Yeah, sure.
Like another species?
Yeah.
So it could be like the
Well, another variety.
Or like
If you got a Hauer apple growing and you graft onto that a Jonagold, and then you can graft onto that. No, you keep going that way if you want.
Cool.
It's less practical because you're going to find out that with your pruning, you're more likely to end up pruning something off, but you can. I have an espalier fence at home, right? That's trained on a flat fence on a flat plane, and it's got branches that go straight out, and the bear wrecked it last year. And so it's got some long vertical or long horizontal branches that are Comis pear, and I grafted a different variety up here. So the ones that come out are going to be a different variety. So yes, you can do that. So the Humboldt Permaculture Guild at their stand there is selling rootstocks. So I'm going to show you the technique you can do for grafting rootstocks. Okay, it's called a whip graft. It's a little more demanding, and I'll try to make a few grafts and pass them around so you can have a look. You take first your rootstock in one hand. You're always holding what you want to graft. The piece that goes flying is not the piece that you want. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And you always want to make sure that it's facing the way you want it to face, right? You don't want to take a Scion and put it on upside down. Been done. Doesn't work. So for a whip graft, what you do is, again, make a nice straight cut, right? Then you take a piece of Scion and you match it up for caliper so that it's about the same thickness. And you make a cut in that, right? That one went too long, didn't work. But it's got this tail. I'll tell you about that tail in a minute. See if we get another one. Yeah, we do. Okay. Sometimes when you make a cut, you get this long tail at the end. If you get that, don't worry about it. Just leave it and ignore it. What's important is that you do want the two cuts to be of similar size and shape. And it might be hard. Again, people can pull up if you want. These are not the same size and shape. We want these to be able to match up like this. This one's too large. So I'm going to keep working down until I get one that looks similar. And here's a good example of one. This is actually a cut that will work. It's got this long tail that I was talking about, and as a beginner, well, even for me, I've been doing this for years, you're going to find these tails. I'm going to cut this tail off in the very end. So what I have to do is ignore it and act like it's not there and match these up. And without that, I see that I've got a pretty good match. And so this is my rootstock. I take my Scion and check them out and make sure that that cut matches well, and it does match pretty well. It would be great if I could somehow just make these things stick together and wrap them up, but you can't. You can't just take these two cuts. If you do that, this is gonna slip and it's gonna drive you nuts. You gotta have a little notch that holds the two together, and this is a notch that people hate because you do have to cut towards yourself for this notch. And the way you do this is really important, and you just kind of practice. It's another grafting technique where you take and the cut itself is you find the halfway point between your cut here. You go up just a tiny bit higher and you make a little notch. And it's very hard to explain. You're gonna have to do it by practice, but all I can say is it's smaller than you think. It's just a little notch. And you're not splitting a piece of firewood. You're making a cut that kind of parallels. You're shaving a little piece up, a little tongue that sticks out. Let me just do it for you. Once you get it started, what I find that's really good is just rock it back and forth rather than pushing it back and forth, particularly for beginners. Just rock your knife back and forth, and it has to be a fairly shallow controlled cut. Notice that I got my thumb, you see this thumb that I'm wiggling around? I've got it firmly rooted onto, my thumb firmly rooted onto my other hand. That's really, really important. Don't cut like this, right? You all see why not? Boom, you're gonna slip, right? This has gotta be a very slow, very controlled cut with your thumb connected to your hand so that it's like you're working one piece and so that you can't slip. That's really critical. You won't find that in books. And then you take your other Scion piece and you just make the exact same type of cut, and this cut will drive you a little crazy.
So were you lining up the cut kind of based on where you're
Yeah,
placing it?
you take the cut itself, you find halfway and you go up just a little bit higher. And then you make the cut, it's just a little notch. When you're done with the cut, pull your knife out, wiggle your knife out, turn it so that it takes that tongue and protrudes it out. And then that way when you stick these two together, they'll catch. So when you've done it right, then they'll stick together. Okay? And then again, you only need 2 or 3 buds here, so you cut it off. Now, I got this tail that I was talking about. All I do is take that and cut it off right, just a little tiny bit above that cut. And that's really important. You don't want it sticking down below. You don't want it protruding down below. If you do have it sticking down too low, it won't heal. I'm gonna make it, I cut it up a little bit higher just so you can really see what I mean by that, and I'm gonna pass that around.
Exposing some of the.
It's exposing a little bit, but I did that on purpose. I wanted to exaggerate it. Question?
Isn't there a tool that will make the notches? I think I've seen a tool that will do
Yeah, and it's for sissies. No, I'm just kidding. There's a tool, you can buy it, it's gonna cost you a lot of money. This is 18 bucks.
Okay.
It's a skill, you can do it.
Okay.
Anybody can do it. The tool's gonna cost you a few $100.
Wow.
You know, it's just, and even then, I've heard really mixed reports about them. It's not hard to do. I'm gonna show you another cut here, and I'm gonna take and show you what happens if you've got a skinny Scion and you've got a thicker rootstock, because you may end up with that, because those rootstocks that they have there are fairly thick, and you might be using thinner Scion. So if we're gonna pretend that's our rootstock, if I have a skinny Scion, right, then I'm gonna make a similar cut. I'm gonna want the cuts to match up, right? Now you'll notice that sometimes if I don't make the right cut first, I can go back and shave it and plane it using this technique and this stance. You can do that very easily. Just practice it. It won't work well doing it this way, but with this stance you can get that down. So get your cuts so that they're more or less the same length,
Okay.
right? And then just do your back cut. Whoops. I've done thousands of these, so it goes quickly for me. Take your time, please. Don't rush it. And what I'm going to do, if it's thicker, is I'm going to line up one side or the other. Don't split the difference and stick it in the middle, but make sure the cambium on one side matches up. And that'll work well. I've got a little bit of tail sticking out on the bottom here. I'm going to clip it off.
You gonna take that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry I didn't go through that. Tape this just like the other one. Goop it on the top. Okay?
You don't need to goop it at the graft, or?
Oh yeah, tape it and cover that tape completely. Okay?
Does that only work if the Scion is smaller than the rootstock?
Yes, good point. You cannot put on a fatter Scion to a skinny rootstock and leave that cambium hanging out, overhanging. That doesn't work.
It has to match.
Yes. The cambiums have to match, and in this case, they have to match it on at least one side. But you can use a smaller, you can graft a smaller Scion onto a bigger rootstock, but not vice versa. Okay? So, somebody, you drop these off? Can you tell me what they are?
Yeah,
Oh,
they're-
they're
That's
Okay.
Fuji.
great. So this gentleman dropped off a Fuji apple and a Jonathan apple, and I got several other varieties of apples, pears, plums, and whatnot. And we got just a couple minutes left. Any other questions or anything?
If after doing the graft you end up with like a pretty big dome right at the graft implementation, that's what usually causes that.
Yeah, that's okay. Some rootstocks that you purchase actually have a tendency to form galls, and you'll do the graft and then you'll get this ball built up there. It's not ideal, but it's fine. Some people say it inhibits the transference of nutrients. I find that it can stunt a tree a little bit, but it's not a big deal. If you got that, just leave it. Don't try cutting it off or anything.
I have a pretty clear idea of what Scion is, but I'm not really sure when you keep saying rootstock,
Yeah.
like what that is.
Okay, when you buy rootstock, you're gonna buy, if you buy it, like take a look, they've got rootstock sitting in a bucket out here behind the Humboldt Permaculture Guild stand. And they're 2-year-old rootstocks, so they're pretty big. But usually a rootstock when you buy will look like that and it'll have some roots on the bottom. It's just a small little sapling, not even a sapling because that's a seedling, it's a small tree. And it's been selected for its rooting characteristics. So it's been selected to be adapted to a specific soil or resistant to a specific soil disease, or more importantly, it's been selected because it grows a very specific height. So that's your rootstock. That's something that you actually buy from a nursery. And most nurseries will sell them in bundles of 50, so you have to buy a bunch of them. Rain Tree Nursery will sell them individually. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you want to let, plant the rootstock and let it grow for a year or two before you graft, or would you want to just graft right away? Or?
No. With the bench grafting that I just demonstrated, you take your rootstock and do the whip graft, put it together, and plant it. And again, what you're going to end up with is a little tree with a little graft on it. And once you plant it, your job is going to be, it's going to push all these suckers out below the graft union, and your job is to keep those suckers pruned down and push that energy into the graft. That make sense? Somebody else had their hand up?
Yeah. What about mixing dwarf varieties with standard size varieties?
The dwarfing and standard, in 90% of the time, you're talking about the rootstock. So like here, these are labeled as this is Fuji on semi-dwarf. Well, the semi-dwarf nature is in the rootstock. It's not determined. Did I pick this out of there? Sorry, I pulled one of it out. I blew it. I blew it. This is another thing. Don't mess up your style. Because look at this. I'm like, wow, which one is it?
It's the one in your left hand.
All right. Oh yeah, it's wet. It's wet. Thank you. God, it's such a mistake. Such a beginner's mistake too. So yeah, it's determined by the rootstock. It's not determined by the top. There are genetic peaches that are genetically dwarfed. And how can you tell a genetic dwarf tree? What determines the height of a tree? If you look at the tree, what's going to determine height? How much it grows between the point which it makes buds. Right? The internodal length is what determines the height of a tree. So if it grows a lot and then makes a bud, boom, it's going to be tall. If it just grows a tiny bit and then makes a bud, it's going to be small. So genetic peaches have their nodes crammed really close together. So close together, it's just like there's leaves coming all out around the tree. So that's a genetic dwarf when you see that. But most trees are the size are determined by the rootstock. Okay? We got 5 minutes left. I think I'm gonna break and move it outside and give Dan a little time to set up, unless there's any other questions. Okay? And then again, there's flyers around that have the website on it. I got a ton of information on the website that I encourage you to check out. Oh, thanks. Thanks a lot.
I have one that's